History of my oldest ancestors of whom I am very proud descend. July 2nd, 1445, dies Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, o Magriço, my 19th grandfather, one of the 12 of England immortalized by Camões, in the Lusíadas. The Magriço, named Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, noble knight andante, was born in 1383 and died on July 2nd, 1445. He was the son of Dom Gonçalo Vosquez Coutinho, 2nd Marshal of Portugal, Lord of Couto de Leomil and Dona Leonor Gonçalves by Azevedo, paternal grandson of Dom Vasco Fernandes Coutinho, Senhor do Couto de Leomil and Dona Beatriz Gonçalves de Moura, and maternal grandson of Dom Gonçalo Vosquez de Azevedo, 1st Marshal of Portugal. Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho was a descendant of Dom Afonso Henriques, his 10th grandfather, through his father. Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, the Skinny, he was a very hard-working and brave knight, and one of the 12 who went to England in the Battle of the Ladies so celebrated in the stories, and in addition, he won in the honor of the King of France, a valoroso Frances, and cut him off the head for defending the right of the dukes and not being tributes to the crown of France, in Nobiliario das Familias de Portugal. The 12 of England. The 12 of England is the name given to a semi-legendary semi-factual story that values the conduct of honor and behavior in accordance with the chivalric ideal practiced by the Portuguese of the Middle Ages, which is referred to in the Lusíadas by Luís Vaz de Camões, right in the first corner, and later on, told in the fourth corner by the voice of a sailor called Fernão Veloso, and which would have happened in the reign of Dom João I of Portugal at the courts of Richard II of England. It is set in medieval Europe and begins by telling how 12 English ladies were offended by 12 nobles, also Englishmen, who claimed that they were not worthy of the name ladies given the lives they led and challenged anyone to defend them with their sword strength. The ladies in question found themselves having to ask friends and relatives for help, all of whom refused their help. No longer knowing what to do, they decided to ask for help and advice from the Duke of Lancaster, João de Gante, who had fought against the Castilians and the Leonese, to obtain the kingdom of Castile and Leon for himself, with the help of Dom João I of Portugal, and therefore knew the Portuguese well. So, as he could not find any champion who would fight for the ladies in England, he appointed 12 Lusitanian knights capable of defending their female honor. The names of these knights, actually 13 in number, are known, and they are all historically attested characters, namely Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, known as O Grão Magriço, O Grande Magriço, or simply O Magriço. Dom Álvaro Vaz de Almoda, later Knight of the Order of the Garter and first Count of Avranches. João Fernandes Pacheco, legitimate brother of the following, son of Diogo Lopes Pacheco, 9th Lord of Ferreira de Aves, one of the murderers of Dona Inés de Castro. Lopo Fernandes Pacheco, legitimate natural brother of the previous one, son of Diogo Lopes Pacheco, 9th Lord of Ferreira de Aves, one of the murderers of Dona Inés de Castro, and brother-in-law, sister's husband, of Magriço. Álvaro Mendes Severa, brother of the following, from Prazo da Pina. Rui Mendes Severa, brother of the previous one, coming from Prazo da Pina. João Pereira da Cunha Agostinho, cousin great-nephew of the Pacheco family, maternal half-nephew of Dom Nuno Álvares Pereira. Sohairo da Costa. Luís Gonçalves Malafaia. Martin Lopes de Azevedo. Pedro Homem da Costa. Dom Rui Gomes da Silva, first mayor of Campo Maia and Uguela. Vasco Aines da Costa, known as Court Real. As soon as they learned of the possible support, each of the ladies wrote to each of the 12 Portuguese knights and even to King Dom João I of Portugal. Along with the letters also arrived the request from the Duke of Lancaster. As a result of what was written in the letters, the entire court felt offended, and since the Portuguese people were gentlemen and defenders of honor, the 12 soon left for England. 11 of the knights would have followed by sea, including Dom Álvaro Vaz de Almoda. But one of them, wanting to demonstrate more courage than anyone else, Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, known as O Magriço, decided to ride his horse overland to get to know strange lands and waters, various people and laws and various tricks, ensuring however who would be present at the right place and date. It turns out that when the day of the tournament arrived, the skinny one was not present, much to the despair of his companions who found themselves reduced to 11 knights against England's 12 knights. The ladies were already dressed in black, as an entire hour was wasting. But at the last moment, and to the delight of his companions, the Magriços appeared, and the fight was fought with glory for the Portuguese, who won the confrontation. First they fought on horseback and then on foot, ending the fight with the victory of the Portuguese, who, in the face of English society, recovered the honor and nobility of the ladies. The valiant Portuguese were, from that moment on, known as the 12 of England. After the fighting ended, they were received by the Duke of Lancaster in his palace, who offered them many parties and honors as a token of appreciation and gratitude. The historical basis for such a narrative is possibly the fact that several of these knights had, in their youth, wandered as knights errant across Europe, fighting in various conflicts, namely, some alongside Dom Pedro, Duke of Coimbra, that of the 7 matches, and then with his eldest son and namesake. The legend of Magriço. Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho was the second son of Dom Gonçalo Vasquez Coutinho, 2nd Marshal of Portugal, Lord of Couto de Leomil and Dona Leonor Gonçalves Azevedo. The prestigious blood of one of the most important families in Portugal in the 14th and 15th centuries ran through his veins. He belonged to the 3rd generation of the Coutinho's lineage. As Fernando Lopes tells us, Dom Álvaro Coutinho was the grandson of a very honorable knight who was called Vasco Fernandes Coutinho, and he was so great and so honored that he left with an infant brother of Elrey, and Elrey favored him and gave him a gift. De Cinco Castles. But the Coutinho's life was not always so favorable. Dom Vasco Fernandes Coutinho did not have easy times until the start of the Fernandes Wars, as he was a second-born son and therefore did not have access to the inheritance of his father, Dom Fernão Martins de Fonseca. But it was the connections of his father, an uncle to the court, mainly to the figure of Dom Pedro I, then still an infant, that allowed him to be in royal service, as a squire around the year 1360. In the royal palace, he managed to contract a marriage that strategically allowed him to rise socially, but it was his energetic military capacity that allowed him to succeed in the king's court. Initially, for marital reasons, Dom Vasco Fernandes Coutinho traveled from Beira to Alentejo, but would return to Beira for military reasons. Between 1361 and 1365, his firstborn, Dom Gonçalo Vasquez Coutinho, was born in Penedono, who would become the progenitor of Magriço. Supporter of King Dom Fernando I, Dom Vasco Fernandes Coutinho had managed to gather and accumulate an interesting land heritage in Beira, to which he added the rights and prerogatives granted. However, he was unable to consolidate the social position of the lineage, something his son would do. Dom Gonçalo Vasquez Coutinho succeeded, in 1383 to 1384, his father at the head of the lineage, but continued to benefit from the important matriarchal position that his mother, Dona Beatriz Gonçalves Moura, revealed to possess as a conscientious family advisor. The chronicler Gomes Eanes de Zurara really wanted us to know that in 1418, the date of Dona Beatriz's death, the obsequies were at the level of a state event. Dom Gonçalo Vasquez Coutinho grew up and received strong military instruction, and his childhood and youth coincided with moments of great turmoil in the kingdom, characterized by the Fernandes Wars and the indecision of the future of the kingdom. His military performance earned him appointments as mayor of important castles and fortified towns, such as the important mayor of Trancoso. In fact, it was in the service of the King of Portugal that Dom Gonçalo Coutinho commanded the Portuguese troops to victory, on the morning of May 29, 1385, in the famous Battle of Trancoso. To the fruits of his exceptional military performance, which led him to be named Marshal of the Kingdom and Fronteiro, he associated his marriage with Dona Leonor Gonçalves Azevedo, daughter of the first Marshal of the Kingdom, Dom Gonçalo Vasquez de Azevedo. Of the 4 children from his first marriage, he had 2 who became famous, Dom Vasco Gonçalves Coutinho, who would become the first Count of Marialva, my 21st grandfather, and Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, the skinny one. Dom Álvaro would have been born, with great probability, in the last 15 years of the 14th century. His nickname, although it was very common in the 15th century, seems to show that Dom Álvaro Coutinho would be well known in his environment for his thin, frail physical portrait. Some literary sources even present him as having a certain amount of hypertrichosis, which would justify some shame on his part. Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, the skinny, received the best instruction and education that could be given to a young nobleman in the 14th century. He was raised to serve and be completely obedient to the king and his father, but the young man also learned his father's trade, just as the biblical precepts commanded, in the same way that Jesus Christ learned his father's trade. Education was divided between military instruction and faith education, and they were certainly not neglected. Dom Álvaro was born and raised in a stately space, where there was a strong military atmosphere. The pillars of instruction were basically horse riding, hunting, and weapons handling. Arrival at court occurred around the age of 15 to 17, although the children of the most illustrious blood nobles were able to attend court from an early age. After the rectification of the peace agreement between Portugal and Castile in 1401, Dom João I, King of Portugal, reformed the court and royal house in the following years. At that moment, Dom Gonçalo Vasquez Coutinho thought it was the best opportunity to place his eldest sons, Vasco and Álvaro, there, with a view to obtaining good marriage alliances for them. Thus, Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho became part of the elite of the king's knights, resident in the royal palace, appearing among the Vigte Grandes que Hijam Damda Continuadamente, as stated in the king's chancellery. However, the desired coexistence and residence at the court of Dom João I was, it seems, neither very advantageous nor peaceful. According to the nobiliary of the families of Portugal of Dom António de Lima Pereira, Dom Álvaro lived a forbidden love, falling in love with a maiden, Dona Isabel de Castro, daughter of Dom Pedro Castro, 1st Lord of Cadaval, 2nd Count of Ariolos, my 20th grandfather. Apparently, the Castro family was not in favor of coexistence between Isabel and Álvaro, vehemently opposing the possibility of marriage. For unknown reasons, this was also against the king himself. Dom Álvaro Coutinho did not respect the opposition of his family or the king and, according to the nobleman, he even raped the maiden, forcing her to marry. As the king was against all of this, Dom Álvaro Gonçalves fell into disgrace before Dom João I, who ordered Dona Isabel to enter cloistered life, in the monastery of Santa Clara in Lisbon. Magriço, contrary to the wishes of his king and the opposition of the Castros, rode to Lisbon, towards the monastery where Dona Isabel de Castro professed, where he came to take her with the order to tell the king as he had promised him. C. Taking care of the king who took her by land. The chronicles say that Dona Isabel de Castro, my 19th grandmother, married Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, having been born from this marriage. Dom Pedro Vaz de Moura Coutinho, married to Dona Brights da Fonseca. Dom Gonçalo Álvares Magriço, married to Dona Oleia Figueroa. Dom Álvaro de Moura Coutinho, nobleman of the royal house, married to Dona Jean Bra Afonso, my 18th grandparents. In fact, the most recent studies on the Coutinho's family have shown that, due to some adversity, Dom Álvaro Coutinho did not marry Dona Isabel Castro, since in 1418 she was locked up in the Santa Clara Monastery, in Lisbon. Also, to date, nothing has been found to attest to the abduction of Dona Isabel de Castro. In fact, as demonstrated by Professor Luis Oliveira, the noble chronicles confuse Dona Isabel de Castro, a Clarissa nun, with another lady, her namesake, wife of Diogo Lopes de Souza, as both are documented from the same time. Another author, Cristovo Ala de Moris, tells of another violent episode that is attributed to Magriço, in which he stabbed to death a cameraman for King Dom Duarte. Such an episode seems very unlikely to us, since it would not have been possible for it to have occurred, given the fact that the author states that this would have happened, Magriço being a young man. Fallen from royal disgrace, Dom Álvaro Coutinho sought to rehabilitate his position before his family and his king, atoning for his evils and misfortunes in foreign lands. In 1411, Dom Álvaro Coutinho was in the service of João Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, who had one of the largest, most renowned and extravagant courts in 15th century Europe. Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho for Terras da Burgundy. Burgundian documentation certifies the presence of Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho at the Burgundian court from 1411 onwards. The Burgundian court was one of the largest, most renowned and extravagant courts in Europe. Dom Álvaro would have arrived in these parts as part of a Portuguese embassy sent by Dom Duarte to João Semedo, Duke of Burgundy, bringing him men-at-arms. Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho actively participated in the civil war between the Burgundians and Armagnacs, where he provided good, notable and pleasant services, mainly in the siege of Paris, in the fighting near the chapel of Saint Denis and in Saint Cloud. João Sem Medo made him chamberlain after October 3, 1411, and, in this more privileged position, he brokered the negotiation of a commercial treaty very favourable to Portuguese merchants and navigators. His commitment to Burgundian military service was great, the battles were very demanding, and, during the year 1417, the battles fought by the Burgundians were very tough, and in one of them, Dom Álvaro Coutinho was taken prisoner by the Armagnacs. He was robbed, stripped and imprisoned in the castle of Carcassonne, where he remained for a long time until his ransom was paid. At the end of April 1418, Dom Álvaro Coutinho was free and in the service of the Duke of Burgundy. In addition to his military participation, Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho was also involved in combats of a festive and chivalric nature, at least twice, before the spring of 1415. The first combat was carried out before February 21, 1415, in the town of Bar-le-Duc, in a web or champ close system, that is, a closed field, built for holding tournaments. In the first joust, Dom Álvaro Coutinho faced an important French military leader, the French Admiral, Pierre de Brabant, the Clugnet, under the eyes of Edward III, Duke of Bar. The description of this combat is present in the main French chronicles of the 15th century. As a chronicle of Jean Lefebvre de Saint-Remy, Chronique de Jean Lefebvre, Seigneur de Saint-Remy, as it is considered the most complete and reliable among all. Furthermore, it is truly admirable. After the jousts in Bar-le-Duc ended, Dom Álvaro Coutinho and other Portuguese knights headed for Paris. There, other jousts and combats, on foot and on horseback, took place following the conclusion of the peace treaty between the Burgundians and Armagnacs. Of these tournaments, held in Paris, between Portuguese and French knights, Álvaro Coutinho participated in one, or rather, to date, we only have documentation that undoubtedly attests to the presence of Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho in one of these combats. The combat took place outside Paris, in Saint-Ouen, in one of the king's hostels, located between Saint-Denis and Montmartre. Lefebvre states that Dom Álvaro Coutinho, there, truly acquired, despite his reward, great honor that day. On October 25, 1415, French troops faced the English army in one of the most famous battles in history, the Battle of Agincourt. If nothing certifies the presence of Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho in Agincourt, it is certain that he remained in the service of João Sem Medo, having provided him with military service during the resurgence of the war between the Burgundians and Armagnacs. Dom Álvaro Coutinho received several gifts on several occasions, that is, payment of monetary amounts as a soldier for services provided or as payment for services provided or even as a payment for equipment. On October 6, 1418, the Duke of Burgundy met with his council, King Charles VI of France and the Royal Council. Among the matters discussed that day was the recognition of Dom Álvaro Coutinho's services and the granting of a large gift of £1,000. The presence of Dom Álvaro Coutinho in the Duchy of Burgundy in February 1419 is still documented. Starting this month, on an uncertain date, Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho returns to Portugal after practically 2 decades in the service of the Duchy of Burgundy. Perhaps he had left with the Portuguese embassy which, at the end of winter or early spring of 1419, left Burgundy heading for Portugal. Dom Álvaro Gonçalves Coutinho, the Magriço, was a Portuguese knight with bearer roots, with a slight figure, but with a strong character, bravery and courage. This is how his contemporaries considered him. In the shadow of the castles owned by his family, he played, grew and learned, training the military maneuvers essential to the exercise of cavalry and the fulfillment of duty. However, as the second son of the head of the lineage, his life was far from easy. Of all the honors and recognition due and deserved, the ones that resonated most were those he achieved in the jousts in which he participated, which the chroniclers, holders of the power of written memory, immortalized. Faced with his opponents, Dom Álvaro Coutinho, even when he did not achieve victory, was recognized as the bravest and most courageous of the knights.